All right, we're a couple minutes in, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our late afternoon, early evening session that we have entitled, Can Politics Be Civil in 2020? I have both a short and a long answer to that. But welcome everybody. Let me review some of the parameters that I went over a few minutes ago as people were joining. The first is, this will be an interactive session. We want to see you if at all possible. We'd love for you to turn your cameras on if you can. You have the ability to mute and unmute yourself, and so there are going to be some times that we'll ask for feedback and conversation and your opinions about things, especially considering what this topic is that we are delving into. Another thing to remember is that we are recording this session, and it will go up on the college website for people to be able to review and see the video later. Just we want to make sure that you know that. So if that changes what you need to do about, video or your face being shown, the session is being recorded and will be made available for other people to watch and listen who couldn't come. This is a conversation that's a part of an entire series of workshops and conversations that we're having within the college to talk about what it means to be inclusive and welcoming and equitable and work for justice together. And it's centered on the very work that you all do as educators and designers and architects and planners and builders. In our very first session, we had great conversations from students about what it means to be a part of this community, starting to share their stories, both triumphs and struggles. We talked earlier this afternoon, had some really great in-depth conversation about just even the foundational language around the ideas of inclusion and community and diversity. Talking about the fact that we don't even speak the same language sometimes, about the definitions of things like equity and inclusion and racism. And so knowing that these conversations aren't a one-time dialogue or conversation, we wanted to spend some time creating some foundational language among everyone as a community so we begin to know more about what we're talking about as we have these conversations. I have really appreciated the input, the honesty, the conversation that has come from you all as a group. I know that's going to continue tonight. This is an interesting topic to me. It's certainly timely. The idea of politics is absolutely connected to the conversation around inclusion and equity and justice. And people have very strong opinions about politics and what that means, and even the role that politics plays in the world. And so as we get started, I'm going to invite you to be part of the conversation in whatever way that you can and is most comfortable. You are welcome to use the chat or to unmute yourself and ask a question or use the little hand raise thing. I will try to stay on top of all of those three formats and see when you are seeking to engage. I'll do some talking. We're going to have some conversation among ourselves as a group. And remembering that as a community seeking knowledge, seeking understanding, this is a space where everyone is welcome. And regardless of your story or your background or where you are on this journey of understanding and learning and delving into the topics of inclusion and equity and justice and diversity, that this is a space for that. It's a space to ask questions. It's a space for you to sit with new ideas or sit with even a sense of being uncomfortable. So I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you have joined us. It's exciting for me to be here. I've really enjoyed my time with you all as Wildcats. I live in the political capital of the country, in Washington, D.C., and so you can imagine it's an interesting place to be right now. In addition to living here, I have this lifelong, deep interest and passion about politics, about our founding as a country, about the presidency. The presidency in particular is interesting to me. As a kid, on our refrigerator, you know, a lot of people had those plastic bright colored letters where you could sit on the floor and, you know, spell words. And, you know, at my house, we had 2 sets of magnets on the refrigerator that I would sit and play with as my parents were in the kitchen or cooking or whatever they were doing. The first set was all the states. And so you could like put them together and make the map fit. And so to this day, I could, in the drop of a hat, put all the states in order. I can tell you all of their capitals. I can recognize the shape because I played with them as kids. The other set of magnets that we had were presidential faces. And it was their full name and the years that they were in office and their political party. And so I, for whatever reason, the useless knowledge that's in my head, I know every president's middle name. And there is no reason whatsoever for me to have that knowledge, except I learned it as like a 5-year-old. Not long ago on Jeopardy, one of the double Jeopardy categories was presidential middle names. And I thought, are you kidding me? Like, this is the topic that I know. So when I got to choose where I wanted to live, and Washington, D.C. was an option, I thought, oh, I have loved this idea of our founding and democracy and being a republic, and what our continuous unfinished work has been about building a country that is supposed to be about equality of opportunity. It's supposed to be about freedom. It's supposed to be about creating a country where all are welcomed. I chose to live here, and it has been a fascinating place to live. The last quirky thing I will tell you about my interest and connection in politics is that because I love this, and people that I know and love know this about me, all the gifts that I get in my life have something to do with, you know, the presidency or the founding of the United States. And so I have on my hand right now 5 of the set of presidential puppets that I own. And I have them all. And they're not even like the big ones that you would think about. It's like Millard Fillmore and Martin Van Buren, and well, there's Teddy Roosevelt and Obama, but I have a room full of this kind of ridiculousness. And the recent addition that I got earlier this year was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So we have her in a place of honor right now. All of that to say, this conversation has to do with who we are as people interacting in the space that we're in. One of the spaces we have been asked to build is our country, is our nation. Local, state, national, we as residents of the country, we as people who interact with one another, we have been given this responsibility to build this. You all as builders should understand this, what it takes to make this happen. So I'm going to slide over here to our share screen. And we're going to talk for a few minutes about, can politics be civil in the year 2020? And I told you I have both a short answer and a long answer. So here's the short answer. Nope. The short answer is absolutely not. But the longer answer begins this way. Can politics be civil? We're going to define what civil is in a few minutes. Not this year. We have gone down the pipe of uncivil, incivil. But can we learn to engage in a more respectful dialogue process? Yes, we can. Now, politics is this big picture idea. Our engagement with politics is where we begin to have some power. It's where we begin to have some influence about how we respond and begin to think about how we engage with our leaders, with our responsibility, with the issues. And so as we talk about this topic and why it matters, this is where we're going to start. The reason that we have difficulty being civil, having calm conversations about politics, is that we're not really talking about politics. We're not really talking about the government. We're not really talking about who's elected and who isn't. The reason this is personal, the reason that it feels so gut level to us is because we're talking about things that are personal. Politics are personal. It's not just about a structure. It's not just about a way of governance or the three branches of government, executive and legislative and judicial. When we talk about politics, what we're talking about is the everyday, the impact our lives issues. We're talking about money and healthcare and faith. We're talking about race relations and power and history and science. We're talking about guns and abortion and climate change, law enforcement and freedom and the very nature of democracy. We are talking about a pandemic, COVID-19, marriage, who has the right to get married, who votes, who gets the right to vote. We're talking about patriotism and religion and truth and capitalism and LGBTQ rights and very life and death of us as individuals and as a country. This is why it's hard. This is why people shout at one another. This is why it feels like I can't talk to you about this because you believe something different than I do about this very issue. It's because it's personal. It's not about the government or the structure. I mean, that's where laws come into play. But it's because when we mean politics, this is what we're talking about. So the difficulty with civility, I said we were going to define civility a little bit. In a democracy, learning to handle disagreements is a fundamental responsibility. The very ideals, the very grounding of a democracy is that there are divergent viewpoints. So in order for us to both theoretically and intellectually understand the democratic values of tolerance and pluralism and respect for different views, it means we have to come to terms with the fact that we're not all going to be in agreement on all of these issues. In fact, I wonder if there is another human being on the planet on which any of us are in full agreement on this entire list of topics. Probably not. So we're looking at all of these issues. We are looking at multiple backgrounds and belief systems and value structures and faith backgrounds and understanding about education and where life begins and citizenship and financial systems. And we're talking about all of that in what's basically a two-sided, two-party system. So we have asked this pluralistic, broad group of belief systems to be split in half and essentially talked about from two different sides. Now, we have more than two parties, obviously. We have Libertarian, we have the Green Party, we have multiple other parties. But in terms of talking about who has power, we're a two-party system. And so finding your way even within one of those two parties can be hard. You might agree with people on one side, but not on the other. And so as we begin to talk through this, as we think about how can we be civil, we come back to, is civility even the right word for us? It's what's been used for so long to say, we need to be civil. Let's practice civility. It's the root word that we use to talk about our system of governments. People take a civics class. We talk about our civil rights. There's so much that comes to play with this. Civility, however, can often be used to shut down authentic, sincere conversation. We can go from, no, I want to delve into these topics, to let's just make sure we're polite. And so what we want to do is be more than polite. We want to be honest. We want to do that with respect. We want to do that with integrity. We want to do that by making sure that each person engaged in the process is given the dignity that they need, that their dignity is honored. And so our conversation today and the conversations we want to have in the 42 days between now and election day, and it is only 42 days, between now and Election Day is to think, how can we engage not politely, but respectfully, but honestly, with integrity, with a sense of engagement and desire to understand another person's perspective and story and where they come from in this process. And so I said, you know, I live in Washington, D.C., and one of my extracurricular activities has been engaging in protest for a long time. I put up some signs here. So this is often how we have come to express ourselves. And, you know, these are funny ones that I put up, like, I don't know what we're yelling about. This sign will accomplish nothing. Down with this sort of thing. That's one of my favorites. Stop premature Christmas decorating. And then this one, generic angry slogan. So because of the structure of government we have, we've got the ability, the freedom, the right, the responsibility to voice our opinions, to question government, to support or vote out or, you know, call into question both our leaders and our neighbors. And that can often come into conflict with the idea of community. How do we go about building a community knowing we're in strong disagreement? And so one sign in particular I want to highlight because it has to do with what we're talking about. Their sign says, I hold some very strong opinions, but none of them are simplistic enough to be adequately expressed on this poster. However, if you'd like to find out more, please feel free to engage me in a calm and intelligent discussion. I thought this was a fantastic sign to have up because it really does get at the heart of what we want to do in terms of thinking through how do we engage with civility and dignity and respect and honesty and transparency with these issues that are deeply, deeply personal to people. Again, it's not just about politics. It's about the issues that were listed on that previous slide. It's about what it means to live together, to work together. And for you all, it's about, you know, thinking through how do you structure this work that you're doing out in the world. In each of the sessions that we have talked about this week, we've started with the college mission that talks about equity. It talks about solving the most pressing problems of the world today. So you all as leaders in this field have the ability to do this. Often we get to a point in this conversation where when people get frustrated with the conversation, they're like, can we just agree to disagree? And everybody knows when we get to that point what we mean by that. Getting to a place of saying, let's just agree to disagree simply means I am tired of talking to you about this. We're not going to reach any point of agreement. Let's just walk away. I'm tired of having this conversation with you. Can we just agree to disagree? It's giving up. It's walking away. It's throwing up your hands in resignation like, oh, I just can't do this anymore. We can just agree to disagree. We can disagree. We can come to a point where we realize I have one perspective on an issue and you have a different one. But all opinions are not equal. And we talk a lot about equality, and that's a controversial statement to say all opinions aren't equal. And here's why. Let's talk about this quote from James Baldwin. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. There's a difference in a difference of opinion and a difference in value, in a difference in understanding humanity, in a difference in perspective. A difference of opinion is like, all right, where's the best barbecue? You know, Kansas City, Texas, or North Carolina. Like, that's a difference of opinion. Now, you all may have some very strong feelings about the barbecue question. That may feel like more than just a difference of opinion to you since you live in Kansas. I, having lived in both Texas and North Carolina, have an absolute answer about where barbecue is the best. And it will be shocking for you all to know that I think Kansas has the best barbecue. The sauce is right. The meat is right. It's too vinegary in North Carolina. In Texas, they just think it's brisket. You all with the burn ends, with the good sauce, I'm all on board with the Kansas barbecue. But that's a difference of opinion. My opinion, our disagreement about barbecue, we can still love each other with that because it's not rooted in anyone's oppression or denial of humanity or right to exist. So that's where we have to come to terms with how we have some civil agreement, disagreement that's more than just politeness. So why do politics feel so divisive right now? Are we less civil than we were in the past? This is a critical question, I think, for us to think about, is why do politics feel so divisive right now? And we have got a good group on here. We've got like 30 people that have joined us. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put us in some breakout rooms for a few minutes and ask you to chat with the people in your small group and answer that question. And I'll put the question in the chat one more time. Why do politics feel so divisive right now? I should spell things correctly. So there's your question in the chat. You're going to get sent to a breakout room. I will call you back in about 8 minutes. So here's what I'd like for you to do once you get into the room. Introduce yourselves to each other. Just say your names and what your major is or what you teach, what role you play. And then I want you to talk about why this conversation mattered to you enough to come today and why you think it's so difficult, the divisiveness in the country right now. Remembering that the parameters we set in the beginning were to listen to one another and to think about one another's perspective and background. When we come back, I'm going to ask you all to share from your rooms about why we think we're in the place we're in right now. Let's talk ideas and not individuals. So if you've had a particular disagreement with someone, we won't say their names, we'll leave them out of it, but let's talk on an idea level. So the question is, why do we think politics are so divisive right now? And why did coming to this conversation feel like a way you wanted to spend some time today? All right, breakout rooms are coming. Here we go. Oh, hey, Tom.
Oh, and this is Joe.
Oh, hello, Joe.
Hi.
I've been admiring your dogs.
Yeah, they're a handful.
They are fantastic.
So since everybody's out of the room, cheers.
I know I haven't made mine yet. I have not, but I will be doing so shortly. Is that Jameson in your glass?
Jim Beam tonight.
Jim Beam. Okay. Well, that can be your next dog's name.
But so in the chat, I did put the link for the stuff, and the first session is now live.
Oh, so great! Hi, puppies. Hi, fluffy puppies.
So it is public. It is live, ready to go. Blah blah blah, and all that kind of good stuff, and it looks great.
Excellent.
So, and thank you for bringing that up in the beginning that you told them that we were going to be recording because it's a big deal. Now, this conversation that we're having right now, we'll edit this out.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise we're talking about dogs and liquor, so you know. I mean, I'm not opposed to that.
That's never happened before.
Yeah. Also, I think Bob is with us.
Bob probably has it on.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And has walked away from it or something like that.
Yes. I mean, I've never done that. I've never turned my camera off and just walked away from
I did that once with the dean, and he started talking to me and asking questions. That wasn't cool.
Yeah. The problem is every Zoom I'm on, I'm in charge of. Like I don't get to just walk away. I need to just be in somewhere my job is to sit and listen. I will be curious to see what their thoughts are after this.
And how long are your breakout sessions for? Did you time it for?
About 8 minutes.
About 8 minutes. I did one similar to this. It was a week long. It was out of Cumberland County, North Carolina. Diversity and inclusion, all that stuff. Jovan Jones was the director of that.
Oh yeah.
And it was an amazing group of sessions of educators, and it was getting teachers' opinions on all of the divisiveness and diversity. And this was going back a couple of months when we had some of the killings and things like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of that going on. It was in the early August, I think, is when we did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of there was about a couple hundred people that were involved in these breakout things. They use GoToMeeting for theirs.
Yeah.
But I was one of maybe a handful that were from out of state, from different universities, giving perspective of, how things are handled in the school districts and university campuses. East Coast, Central, and West Coast were very different.
Interesting.
Their viewpoints were very different of how they handle things. Because I happen to think Midwesterners tend to be a lot more laid back and really don't speak out nearly as much as an East Coast person will, or be as assertive.
I think that's absolutely true. So I have conversations with students at campuses across the country, and if I didn't know what, like if it were a blind campus, I had no idea where it was, I could pretty accurately tell you what region of the country they were from based on their outspokenness and opinions. And the South is different than the Midwest, is different than the West Coast. The Northeast is an incredibly difficult place to navigate a facilitated conversation. They will call anybody out on anything at any time. And it can really be tough to help them have that kind of a conversation. I have never seen students shut one another down like I have seen at a couple schools this summer in Connecticut and Pennsylvania.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go off camera and off mic to harassing dogs.
Excellent. Hi, Kara. If you can hear me, I think you just joined us. Everybody's in a breakout room right now, and they're going to be coming back in a couple of minutes. So if you just want to hang out right here in the main room, that is just fine. And everybody's going to be joining back with us in a couple of minutes. They're having a conversation in their breakout room about why politics feels so divisive right now in 2020.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, it looks like everybody's back. Nice job navigating the cyber travel from room to room. It's a fun thing we get to do now, just go from place to place outside of our own control. Okay, I would love to hear from some of you all from your group. What did you talk about? What was said in your group about why we think politics feel more divisive now, or are they? Or why is this conversation personal to you today? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop into the chat.
I guess I could start. Hi, my name is Albert. My group was me, Albert, LB, Wendy, Lucas, and Chloe. And basically, our conversation led to like this really deep and like just to summarize it, it came out as like, from my point of view, people are not listening, and because of that, people are getting hurt. And then from there, we talked about why is that, and then we talked about how Wendy said that people are not critically thinking, and then that's a big problem. So, and then Chloe brought up an idea of how social media brings this big problem as well, where um, there's news out there, and then because it's the only thing they see, that they believe it instantly. And then there's also like some things in social media where, because you only watch these certain videos, you only get recommended these certain videos. You don't have the broad spectrum of knowledge that you think you need, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, well said. Thanks. You're right with social media. It's about we're in a vacuum. We get to pick and choose what we listen to and who we follow and what perspective we get. It's become very siloed and segregated. Yeah, thanks, Albert. Somebody else want to share about the conversation in your group?
For our group, it kind of related to the same, in which like access to the internet and this being the age of technology, and the reason why it seems so divisive now is because looking back to the past, we can only really get secondhand accounts, and we're experiencing it now as opposed to then. So there's that possibility of it was as divisive back then. It's just that now we instantaneously know things that are happening around the world.
Yeah, that's very true. There's not this pause and lag and critical thinking, and it comes up as it's happening. We hear about it immediately. You're right. Yeah, thanks, Oscar.
Our group talked about also along the lines of social media and like misinformation sometimes, and then also one of the topic was like having some of the rules changed, like where sometimes it was impolite to say something, or really just being respectful was maybe like the norm. And now like it has changed to like almost saying whatever is on your mind. But along with the social media, I was just thinking about how like words don't necessarily carry body language or anything like that, and graphics can be so powerful too when it's on a screen, or it's a different type of communication than in face to face.
Yeah, very perceptive for sure.
We also talked about internet and how immediate access to information in like one-sided information might impact us. And also another thing that we talked was about what you mentioned about the difference of opinions. And apparently in current situation, some of the opinions that one group has is definitely oppressing in some way the other group's rights. So when the values are so fundamentally different that if one group is in power, their values lead to some sort of oppression to the other group. So this is a source of division between groups. And the other thing that we talked about was the fact that having only two parties that could have power makes it difficult to have a dialogue that has among people who might accept some aspects of opinions from one party and some from the other party. And if you want to do anything, you need to connect yourself to one of these two sides of power, which means that you are against the other one.
What a brilliant way to say that it has become, everything's become oppositional. It's everything is a for or against. If you are on one side, you are immediately against the other side.
It's polarized. It's been polarized.
Yes. Yes, it's no longer, and maybe, certainly none of us have, been alive since the founding of the country. There has always been division. There's always been disagreement from the founding on. But are we at a place where defeating, winning, beating the other side is more important than moving the entirety of the country forward? And that's a question I think that it's important to ask is, where is that division, and where are our priorities? And the idea that you're either on one side or the other. Not that it's a unified front moving one direction, but you're either for or against. Thanks. Someone else, is there a group we haven't heard from, or someone who wants to share what your group talked about or your perspective of this?
Carrie, before you move on to another group, I just want to give an example of that where it's all or nothing. One way they're winning. If you are, and I get information from both parties. So, but one party sends you information and says, "Are you going to vote for this person for president?" And then it will ask you, "Are you going to take that same position for all the down ballots?" So if your answer is no, where does that leave, the whole discussion from then on? Because if you're looking at your down ballot race for a state and locals, your opinion about that, again, all or nothing. It's either you're going to vote one way through everybody. And so that puts you in a position of thinking about independence and being somewhere in the middle now, as opposed to either side, either dramatic edge. The edges have gotten tightened a lot. And I think that there's probably more people finding disgust with being on either edge and feeling like there's very little independence to think critically about a position that, again, as Sarah said, could mean you are agreeing on one side and being set up as officially affiliated with the other group, even when you aren't.
And I'll piggyback on that and just add something that our group talked about, which was, that it's not only that it's polarized and it's one or the other, but it's also that the climate is such that should you stick your neck out and express anything politically, or God forbid, just be yourself and different, you will pay for that with some sort of public, trolling at best, and death threats at worst. So, there is a significant price to pay to, enter the arena.
Yes, Leslie, I appreciate you bringing that up, because the reaction, so many of you mentioned in your comments about the internet and access to social media and the immediacy of information, and the gifts that we have gotten from the internet are immeasurable. But there is also a dark side to that. There is also a shadow side to that, both availability and access, in terms of propaganda and manipulation and misinformation from all kinds of sides and sources. it also has allowed for reaction, retribution, as you said, everything from, call outs on social media, bullying, to death threats or actual violence has been levied down on people. And, when I said politics are personal, this is why we're not talking about things just in theory. It has become blood sport for people in order to prove right or prove wrong or define who's on one side or the other. And we're at a moment of needing to decide how we can and want to move forward. As people, as a country, in how we go about this. There have been shifts. A lot of times people will say, oh, it's always been rough, or politics have always been dirty, or there's always been, something. But the Brookings Institute has done multiple studies, one of which they got responses from 126,000 people. And they talked about their confidence in our political system. And they have done this. The Brookings Institute's been around since 1912, I think. I'll double check that and make sure that date is right. But they have done this every 3 or 4 years, this massive survey. And the confidence in our structure and system of government is at the lowest point that it's ever been. And so, some of that comes into play in terms of how we're responding to this. Someone else, what did you all talk about in your group? Or why is this an important topic for you that you want to be a part of the conversation?
I guess for me as well, it's like some people just talk the talk and don't walk the walk, and that's just hard to take in.
Yeah, it is, because this is personal for people. Back to that original list of why people do, to use Leslie's phrase, stick their neck out. It's because we actually are, the last thing I put on that list was life and death. We actually are talking about people's ability to survive, to thrive, to live, to be safe. We are talking about people's ability to earn money and have a career and have access to housing and food and education and health care. And when we think through that, it's not just in theory, it's things that actually impact people. Now, the way we go about talking about this, that's another piece. And I'm going to shift us into gear for a second. In talking about the difference between dialogue and debate, too often the only examples that we have of interaction are unhealthy ones. It is pundits shouting at one another on a screen. It is people of opposing viewpoints fighting to just shut down the other side. And so having a conversation about the difference between dialogue and debate, I think, can be a critical step in how we are able to engage in the political system and structure. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between these two and think about we need both of them at some point, but where they can come into play. So if it's dialogue, it's collaborative. A debate is oppositional. In dialogue, what we're seeking is understanding. A debate is about proving the other person wrong. In a dialogue, what we're listening for, seeking, is deeper meaning. In a debate, we're looking for flaws. Did someone say something we can pounce on? Did you share an idea that I can attack, that I can come at, that I can prove you wrong with? In a dialogue, it's about reevaluating your assumptions and opinions and thinking about why that perspective it matters to you. In a debate, it's about defending yourself, defending your position, defending your opinion, defending your assumption. Even if someone offers a perspective or an opinion or viewpoint that causes you to question, if you're in debate mode, chances are you're going to dig your heels in and stick to your guns. Dialogue is meant to be open-minded. Debate is a closed-minded process. You have your stance. You are sticking with it in order to win. In dialogue, you often have the ability to put your own beliefs aside in order to hear another person's beliefs. It doesn't mean you have to change yours. It means you can listen and hear another person's. In a debate, it's only about defending them. Dialogue includes searching for validity in all ideas, knowing that not all ideas are good. Debate is about searching for weakness in other ideas. Dialogue comes with respect. Debate can often be mean. It can just be cold-hearted. Dialogue is about exploring different possibilities. Debate is about having one right answer. Having no understanding that there could be multiple right answers, that there's a gray area, that we could both be right or both be wrong or both be somewhere in the middle. Dialogue is open-ended, it's ongoing, it's collaborative. Debate demands a conclusion. With debate, you want an end, you want a winner and a loser. Having a winner and a loser is where we get into some trouble. Looking for winners and losers is the opposite of building communities that are safe and welcoming for everyone. Now, there are opinions, there are values, there are structures that don't lean toward inclusion, that don't lean toward everyone having a place at the table, a voice, having power, having influence. And so when we are talking about politics, really what we're talking about is conflict. We're talking about how we navigate this. And, you know, there are all kinds of jokes and memes about, you know, all right, it's an election year. You know, what are you going to do at the dining room table? What topic can you bring up? Who are you going to ignore? Who are you going to talk to? What kinds of things are safe or unsafe? The Gallup organization polled middle schoolers this year. Back in January, they collaborated with school districts in all 50 states, in DC and in Puerto Rico. And they asked, what are the topics that you are most afraid of bringing up at the dinner table? What does your family fight about most? When conversations come up and there's a disagreement, what is it about? Now, these are middle schoolers. It was 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and their answers were fantastic. I'll work backward from the list of what they were. Number 5 is laundry. Like, who does the chores, dishwashing? It wasn't just laundry. It was like household chores. That's what their family fights about. 4, 3, 2, and 1, you can probably guess. Number 4 was money. Number 3 was nonsense. They were like, we're arguing about nothing. Who likes what for dinner? What's on the remote control? What are we going to watch? What TV show? They were like, it's just arguing for arguing's sake. 2 and 1 were about religion, and 1 was about politics. So middle schoolers were like, oh, anytime anybody mentions, and they would talk about the election or politics or protest or marching or anything, they were like, this is what we argue about the most. Not in our nuclear small family group. They were like, when we have extended family, big groups at the table. So this idea of dialogue versus debate, how do we engage in this? I think for a lot of people, the pandemic is going to help them not have to be around a Thanksgiving table with some people that they deeply disagree with 2 weeks after a presidential election. They might just be able to say, I'm sorry, it's not safe. I can't keep my mask on. I'm not going to come. But we as engaged citizens, as people who are committed to wanting to move our community in a safe direction, in a positive direction, we've got to find ways to be able to talk about this. We have to be able to engage in conflict and have some tools at our disposal to help us do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about conflict styles, because everybody's got one. Everyone has a conflict style in one setting or another. And your conflict style might change based on who you're in conflict with or what the topic is. But here come 5 conflict styles. Oops, sorry. I think I went somewhere wrong there. Let me come back to the share for a second. Okay, here we go. I think I hit the wrong button. There we go. 5 conflict styles. You're going to see yourself in one or more of these at different points. The first one is avoiding. You just don't engage in whatever the conflict is. Generally, that's because either the issue or the relationship aren't that important. You're like, it's not worth me digging into this with you either because, you know, I don't care what we're arguing about, or I don't have the emotional energy and capacity to engage with you about that. The relationship doesn't matter enough for you to give yourself over to that, or you just hate conflict. But generally, when you hate conflict and won't engage with it, you're in conflict style number 2, which is accommodating. So in the accommodating, it's that the relationship, the person, that's more important than whatever the issue is. You're not willing to lose or injure or hurt that person or that relationship over whatever this issue is. The issue is less important than that person. This often sounds like, oh, my grandpa and I do not agree about fill in the blank, and so we do not talk about it. I'm just going to let him say what he says. It's fine. I'm just not going to do it. You know, I love him and he's from a whatever generation, or he believes this and I believe that, and I love him, and so I'm not going to get into it. So you're accommodating to his argument. The third is forcing. This is where whatever that issue is, it's so important to you, it's core, it's central to who you are, that is the truth of that, the value of that to you is more important than the relationship. You're willing to push back against the person and the relationship because you're not willing to compromise on whatever the issue is. If someone says something, believes something, puts up an opinion that so goes against your value system and what you deem important in your structure, that you're like, I can't let that slide. That looks like, yeah, I care about you, but I cannot be silent about this thing that you said or did or comment that you made. So that's the third conflict style, is forcing. The fourth one is compromising. So this, in compromising, cooperation is important. This is about both sides giving something up, both sides getting something. It's kind of a middle ground kind of way, like, okay, yeah, I'll let you have that, but I'm not giving up on this. It's it's just kind of a compromising. The fifth one is collaborating, and this is the one that takes time and work. This is where both the relationship and the issue are important. So you're not willing to give up on the idea. You're not willing to give up on your stance, your value, what matters to you, whatever the issue is. But you're also not willing to give up that person, what they mean to you, the role they have in your life. Or you love them so much that it's really important that they understand why this is important to you. And so you seek to collaborate with them. Now, here's what's important about all of these is it's a two-way street. Anytime you're dealing with conflict, one of you may want to solve the problem and one of you may not. And so if you're not both willing to collaborate, if you're not both willing to have some conversation around this, then chances are you're not going to get very far in the collaborative setting. So we have this avoiding, accommodating, forcing, compromising. Do you see yourself in some of these at some points? Does anybody have an example of when you have been in one of these, an accommodating, an avoiding, a compromising, a collaborative? Who's got an example for us?
Okay, Carrie, I'm going to give you one real quick. Congress and the filibuster is a perfect example of both avoiding and forcing. I mean, that right off the bat, if you don't care about the other person and you really don't want to have the conversation about the issue, it's easier to either hold up Congress time at the podium over and over and over again.
That's right. That's a good example. Anybody else have an example of conflict and what style or type it is that you've seen? I have one that is, I have family friends that I have known for a long time, and we are on opposite ends of the political spectrum in every way that you could imagine. And I love these people. And we at first thought, you know what, let's just not talk about any of this. But that's not the kind of people that we are on either one of us, any of the group of us. And so we argue and push and pull and what about this and how can you believe that and let me share this with you. And it's this back and forth of ideas and thoughts, and we still have love for each other, but we have found some middle ground, some understanding about some issues. And it comes back to that James Baldwin quote about there can be love for people until it is about oppressing or standing in the way of another person's right to live. And so we don't differ on those. I don't know that I would be good at having long-term interactive relationships with people who I knew were actively working to oppress someone else. I don't know that I would be good. I'm not good at that. And so as we talk again about conflict, I'm going to pull up one more conversation about resolving conflict. It's a 5-step thinking through, all right, if you're in conflict, if it's a political conflict, if it's personal, life is full of conflict at some point. So there are 5 steps I think are helpful to think through this. Step 1 is maybe the most important. You have to decide if you actually want to solve the conflict. Not everyone does. Sometimes you're not looking for a solution. You know that you stand on this rock and they stand on that rock, and you're not looking for compromise or to bring them over. But if you are looking to resolve conflict and you have said you want to move forward in this, then you start with step 2 after you've decided, yep, I'm looking to resolve some conflict, is always start by introducing the problem from your own perspective. You know, we learn this. Start with I statements. If we say things like, you do this and you always do that, and every time you is a verbal finger point, it makes people be defensive and they're like, no, I don't, and you do this, and it becomes an argument. If we start with, I feel, I believe, when fill in the blank happens, it's much harder to argue with that. If I start with, oh, it hurts my feelings when, and you say what happened. Or, you know, I believe that this is important. It's hard for the other person to say, no, you don't. If it's something as simple as, you know, you got some roommate conflict going on. In grad school, I had a roommate that I adored. We shared an apartment and we've been friends for a long time, and he never cleaned the kitchen. I'm going to come back to the screen in just a minute. Never. There were dishes everywhere all the time. And I thought we had talked about it, and apparently the message didn't get through because I apparently wasn't very clear. And I come home one night and he's sitting in the living room, feet up on the table, and has gotten every pot and pan and dish dirty in the kitchen that you can imagine. And instead of just saying, hey, Tony, you know, can we talk about kitchen rules and how we go about this? And, you know, nope. I start as loudly as possible, throwing pots and pans into a dishwasher. I'm slamming lids down. I am sighing loudly. I am banging cabinets shut. And he's like, hey, is everything okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. It's nothing. And he's like, okay, do you want me to come up? I'm like, no, I've got it. It's fine. The most passive aggressive reaction you could imagine I was having with him, because I had not gotten to a place where I thought, oh, I don't want to solve this problem. I want to be mad about this. You know, I wasn't using I statements. If I had said to him, you know, you never clean the kitchen, and he'd have been like, well, you don't always clean the kitchen. But if I had had the wherewithal to say, you know, when I come home from work or school and I want to cook something and all the dishes are dirty, I get really frustrated. He can't say, no, you don't. And so when you start having conversations about politics, about things that matter from you, things that matter to you, have some conversation about why it's important to you and what matters to you. Then number 3 is, all right, can we have an attitude of inquiry and curiosity? So allow the other person to give their perspective fully. That can be incredibly difficult to do because we want to answer. We get into debate mode. We want to prove that we're right and the other person is wrong, and how we do that. Once you have allowed them, and I mean actually allowed them to share their perspective, listening as though you are taking in what they're saying, listening to understand, listening to gain a perspective instead of just listening to respond, listening to bat down their argument. If you have really begun with an attitude of inquiry and curiosity, and allowed people to give their perspective, the next step is to actually acknowledge their perspective. I hear what you're saying. Thanks for sharing that. This does not mean you have to agree with what they said. It does not mean you have to share their perspective. It does mean there should be some sense of agreeing with them. The final step is to find a solution together. And let me back up and say that 5 doesn't work. 3 and 4 don't work unless the other person also wants to resolve the conflict. Number 1, you've got some control over. Number 2, you have got some control over. Number 3, you can cultivate an attitude of inquiry and curiosity. If they're not willing to engage, then you get stuck. Then you have done what's within your power to do. Because we're talking about real life, difficult, complicated topics, we're not talking about dishes. We're not talking about minor roommate conflict. We're talking about real life, painful, difficult topics. Leslie asked a really important question in the chat. How do we engage in dialogue when truth and facts can no longer be agreed upon? That's where we are right now. Arguments, questioning about what science is, what truth is, what fact is. And, you know, Leslie, you said it sounds like a dumb or loaded question. I don't think it is. I think it is an absolute central question to where we are right now. If we cannot agree on what truth is, if we can't agree on what a fact is, it does become difficult to engage in dialogue. I'll come back to the fact that dialogue requires multiple willing participants. You can't have a dialogue with a person who's trying to have a debate. Both of you have to agree, or the group of you, or multiple of you, have to agree that this is going to be a dialogue. And that comes down to even having a conversation about the parameters of the discussion. And these are things we haven't been great at. If it's going to be a hard conversation, acknowledge that. Say, hey, I've got something important I want to talk to you about. And I want us to talk about how we're going to have the conversation. It's very adult-like. It's very difficult to do, to say, you know, I really would like to talk about this. And if you all agree to talk about it, if you can come to terms about it, it's awkward and uncomfortable to start that way. But it really is the only way to ensure that both of you are on the same page to start with. You can even start with, you know, I'm not looking to change your mind, and I'm certainly not, you know, looking to have mine changed. But I want to understand more about your perspective. Inviting people into conversation and dialogue is where we have to start. Too often, right now, all of our engagement is nothing but one person posting a comment, a second person posting a response, without even maybe reading the other person. We are so embedded in, you know, our Twitter responses and our Facebook posts and our Instagram messages, that there is less and less actual listening, actual back and forth. Because Leslie, I agree with you that it's incredibly difficult when we don't have a base understanding, a base agreement, even of what truth is. Conflict is painful. It's personal. It centers around relationships. One of the very first things that we talked about was that politics are personal. We are not talking about just something out of a textbook or an idea that's floating around in space. We're talking about things that matter to people's lives. And when we talk about conflict, we're talking about relationships. And we're talking about broken relationships. We are talking about injury. We're talking about pain. We're talking about strain and loss and hurt and abuse and devaluing of people's self and their story. And so that becomes much more individual than just the broadness of a political party. A lot of times people will say, oh, I hate politics. I just do not want to get involved at all. I don't pay any attention to that. And there are multiple reasons for that. Sometimes it's because what politics mean to them is broken relationships from people that they have loved and cared about. Sometimes people don't want to get involved in politics because it requires work to think through significant issues. Sometimes it's because our privilege allows us to walk away. If the decision that's being made isn't going to change my life one way or another, if I feel safe because of my education level or good job that I have, or my race or my gender or my marriage status or citizenship status, that I don't have to deal with a complex, difficult issue, then I can say I'm just going to turn that off and not pay attention to that. And so we are dealing with both the public and the private when we're talking about political conflict. All of us are invested in this right now, in terms of how we engage. How do you think about what we're doing and how we do things and how we go about it? Today, just by random happenstance, is National Voting Day. It is National Voter Registration Day today, September 22nd. And so as we think about politics and what we do and how we go about this, a wise person who was quoting a judge in Kansas said, listen, you can change an opinion, but you'll never change a belief. You can change an opinion, but you'll never change a belief. And this friend just said this to me right before the session started, and it struck me as powerful and important, that people's belief systems are theirs and they're committed to them, and it's there for a reason. And there is a difference between an opinion and a belief and a value. And one of the things that you have to decide as an individual, because this is so personal, is how you will respond and where you will engage. And, you know, we hear this a lot, this idea of don't fight, vote. That's one of the places publicly that your power lies, is voting and organizing to vote and helping other people register to vote, and helping people get to the polls and answer questions and help them with information. But you won't be able to change a lot of beliefs depending on how you engage. This is difficult. It is divisive. It does feel painful. But there's also lots of hope in the idea that we have the right, the responsibility to engage in our system of governance, that we have the ability to help build and restructure and remodel and weave together what we want both our local and national communities to be. This is probably said every election year, every time, you know, every year or 2 or 4 that we come up on this. But I don't know that it's ever been more important for each one of us individually to think through critically about where we stand on issues and to engage with our time, with our energy, with our money. Our national voting statistics are abhorrent when you look at the percentage of eligible voters that actually go to the polls and vote. It's higher during presidential elections than it is during non-presidential election years. But so many people fought, died, struggled to gain the right to vote. Some people have had the right to vote longer than other people. And the fact that we might be inconvenienced to not be able to do that or not, there are still people struggling for their own right to vote, and access to that, and making it open to as many citizens as possible. So as we come to the end of our time together, you know, we've talked a lot about conflict and listening and politics and why this is hard. How are you going to engage in this system and process moving forward? Do you have a commitment in the next 42 days, or what are you going to do to make sure that your voice is heard? What kind of things are you engaged in right now with politics, and do you think there's a chance it can be done civilly? Who's got a final comment or word for us? Has anyone already voted? Anybody? Yeah, I'm looking for hands. Oh, there's one. Okay. Early voting just started here in person. Do you have a plan to vote if you are eligible is the next question that I will ask. Thinking about in the mail or absentee. Are you registered? Do you know what those deadlines are? Because today is National Voter Registration Day, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. That makes me super happy. It is incredibly important. Again, as we continue our conversations about inclusion, voting is a place we want as many people included as possible. As we talk about community, as we talk about equity, this is where on a national and local level we can voice our values, we can voice our beliefs. Thanks for coming to our conversation this evening. I'm excited to have had this dialogue. I appreciate your popped into a couple of small groups and really enjoyed that conversation. Anyone have a final word about politics you want to share with us?
I can go real quick. At least for me, I think the important part regarding politics is just to keep yourself informed and try to make a decision based on the facts rather than just something on the spur of the moment. And I think that kind of goes back to Leslie's question about whether or not engaging in a dialogue when truth or facts are no longer agreed upon. It's just a different language at that point. And sometimes you just need to take the time to either understand somebody else or to better explain your own position.
Well said. Anyone else? Last chance, going once, going twice.
So in a voting sense, I think we have till the 13th of October to register in Kansas. So, and we do have, there's one of your colleagues that's on the ICC committee with us that can help you if you live in the dorms or live on campus to figure out how to register to vote and things. So we're going to start getting some information out on campus here pretty soon.
Good.
But thank you, Carrie. It's been really a good conversation today, and all the conversations today have been great. Tomorrow we have one on unconscious bias.
Yes.
And so I would encourage everybody to participate in that one. That one has a little bit more of a student focus, but you can go to either one of them. And that one's at lunchtime-ish tomorrow also. So.
Yeah, we're offering that once on Wednesday and once on Thursday. So if one of the two doesn't fit your schedule, come to the other one.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Thanks so
much,
much,
everybody. Good
Have a
seeing
good
you all.
evening. I hope we keep waving at people in person when we leave meetings, like in a conference room. I hope we just kind of wave at the table and do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Carrie.